She wore red to someone else's engagement party and walked straight into the arms of a man who had no business making her heart stop. Dominic didn't plan it. Aurora didn't want it. But that night, in a silent room with only a piano as witness, something was born that neither of them could bury. She tried, God, she tried. What happens when the most dangerous thing in your life is the only thing that feels real? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member for early access to the next stories. And if you felt this was truly worth your time, click the Worth It button too. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing narratives that move you.
Hello, I'm Marcus Hale, and this story proves that love comes when we least expect it.
Chapter 1.
The Hamptons in late September had a particular kind of arrogance, the kind that came with ocean-salted air, manicured hedges, and champagne that cost more than most people's rent. The Caldwell estate wore it well. By 8 o'clock, the main hall was already electric with the kind of energy that only old money and new ambition could generate together. Laughter too polished to be genuine, jewelry catching the light at calculated angles, conversations that meant 3 different things, depending on who was listening. Aurora Voss moved through it like someone who knew every step of the dance and had quietly decided she was done performing it. She wore a dress the color of deep wine, fitted, elegant, with a neckline that suggested confidence without demanding attention. Her dark hair was pinned up in a way that looked effortless and had taken exactly 40 minutes. She carried a glass of champagne she hadn't touched, mostly because holding something gave her hands a purpose that didn't involve checking her phone every 4 minutes. Ada was, as always, the sun in the center of the solar system. Aurora watched her cousin from across the room and felt the familiar mixture of genuine love and quiet exhaustion that defined their relationship. Ada in a red dress was a force of nature, luminous, magnetic, commanding every gaze in the room without appearing to try. Her fiancé stood beside her with the expression of a man who still couldn't believe his luck. Aurora understood the feeling. Ada had that effect on people. She slipped away from the main hall just past 8:30, not dramatically, not with any particular destination in mind. She simply followed the corridor that curved away from the noise, past a series of framed black and white photographs of coastlines she didn't recognize, until the laughter behind her softened into something bearable. She exhaled for what felt like the first time all evening. She was reading one of the photographs, a pier somewhere, fog sitting heavy on the water, when the door to her left swung open. She didn't hear it in time. The champagne hit her shoulder first, cold and immediate, a cascade of pale gold against the wine-dark fabric of her dress. She gasped, not loudly, but sharply, and stepped back and looked up. The man looking back at her was tall, dark-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the kind of precision that wasn't accidental. His expression moved through surprise and landed somewhere closer to concern, and his eyes, dark, direct, completely unreadable, stayed on her face a beat longer than the moment required. "I'm sorry." His voice was low and unhurried. "That was entirely my fault." "It's fine," Aurora said automatically, and then looked down at her dress and amended, "It's manageable." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded pocket square, white linen, monogrammed in the corner. He held it out to her without making it a gesture. No performance, no smile designed to soften the situation, just the square, extended with quiet practicality. She took it, pressed it against her shoulder, felt the champagne already cooling against her skin beneath the fabric. "Aurora Voss," she said, because the silence felt like it needed a bridge. "I know," he said. She looked up. Something shifted in his expression. Not embarrassment, exactly. More like a man catching himself saying something he hadn't planned to say aloud. He adjusted, almost imperceptibly. Ada mentioned she had a cousin coming from the city. Financial analyst. Sharp as a blade, I believe, were the words she used. Aurora studied him for a moment. She tends to be generous. She tends to be accurate. A pause, precise as punctuation. Dominic Hale. The name landed with the weight of recognition. She'd heard it in boardrooms, at charity galas, in the particular way men said other men's names when they wanted to signal importance. She hadn't attached it to a face before now. She handed back the pocket square. You should probably get back to your guests. Probably, he agreed. But he didn't move. Neither did she. For 3 full seconds that felt distinctly longer. There was something in the air between them. Not tension exactly. Something quieter. The specific feeling of a sentence that trails off before the period, leaving the meaning suspended somewhere between 2 people who both noticed it and neither acknowledged it. Aurora was the one who finally stepped back, something efficient and composed resetting in her posture. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Hale." She turned down the corridor, heels quiet against the marble floor, champagne drying cold against her shoulder. She didn't look back, but she was aware, with the precise analytical part of her mind that catalogued details the way other people catalogued feelings, that she could still feel his gaze at her back, steady and unhurried, long after she disappeared around the curve of the hallway. The pocket square was still faintly warm from his jacket. She realized 2 corridors later that she was still holding it.
Chapter 2.
The side door was unmarked, just a narrow panel of dark wood set into the wall between 2 oversized floral arrangements that nobody was paying attention to. Aurora found it the way she found most things, by accident and then by instinct. The main hall had gotten louder in the last 20 minutes. Someone had made a toast that turned into a speech, that turned into something uncomfortably close to a performance, and the laughter responding to it had that particular pitch, too bright, too synchronized, that made Aurora's temples ache. She set her untouched second glass of champagne on a passing tray and moved toward the quietest edge of the room until the unmarked door was the only logical next step. She pushed it open, expecting a coat closet or a service corridor. What she found instead made her stop completely. The room was large and deliberately dim, lit only by the ambient glow filtering through 2 tall windows that faced the garden. A grand piano sat at its center, black lacquer, lid raised, keys exposed, with the particular stillness of an instrument that hadn't been touched in hours, but hadn't been forgotten either. The air smelled faintly of cedar, and something warmer underneath it, like a room that was used to holding silence and had learned to wear it comfortably. Dominic Hale sat in a leather chair positioned directly in front of the piano, jacket unbuttoned, one arm resting along the side, his gaze fixed on the keys with an expression Aurora felt completely unqualified to interpret. He wasn't reading. He wasn't on his phone. He was simply present, in the specific way that people rarely allowed themselves to be at their own parties. He looked up when she entered. He didn't look surprised. "I'm so sorry," Aurora said, already pulling the door back toward her. "I was looking for... I didn't know anyone was in here." "You weren't interrupting anything." His voice carried the same unhurried quality she'd noticed in the corridor, like a man who had made deliberate peace with the space between words. "You can stay." She hesitated at the threshold. The noise from the hallway pressed gently at her back. "I'll close the door," she said finally. Not a question. "Please," he said. The latch clicked behind her, and the party disappeared entirely, sound swallowed, reduced to a faint and distant murmur that could have been coming from another building altogether. Aurora stood for a moment with her back against the door, letting her eyes adjust, letting the quiet settle into her the way quiet always did when she finally found it, like something unlocking at the base of her spine. She crossed the room slowly and sat at the far edge of the piano bench, leaving a careful distance between herself and the keys, between herself and the fact that he was watching her without appearing to watch her. "Do you play?" she asked. "I used to." A pause that carried actual weight. "I stopped about 3 years ago." "Why?" He considered the question with more seriousness than most people gave to questions like that. "Because I was using it to avoid things I should have been facing, and at some point, that felt like a dishonest use of something I actually loved." Aurora turned that over quietly. It was not the answer she had expected. It was more honest than the room required, more layered than a first conversation between 2 people at a party warranted, and yet it landed without pretension, like a man simply stating a fact he'd already made peace with. "That's a very precise reason," she said. "You seem like someone who appreciates precision." The corner of her mouth moved, almost involuntarily. "Ada talks too much." She said it like a compliment. "It was," Aurora admitted. "She just doesn't always realize which parts I'd prefer she kept to herself." Dominic's gaze shifted briefly toward the piano keys, then back to her. In the low light, his features had lost the polished sharpness she'd catalogued in the corridor. He looked quieter here, more like a person, less like a name she'd heard in conference rooms. "Why did you come to this party?" he asked. "Ada is my family. I don't miss things that matter to her." "That's not the same as wanting to be here." She looked at him. He wasn't being provocative, she could hear that. He was just listening closely enough to notice the difference, which was somehow more unsettling than any challenge could have been. "No," she said after a moment, "it's not the same." They sat with that honesty between them, comfortable in a way that had no logical explanation. The piano gleamed in the dark. Outside, the garden held its breath. Somewhere in the main hall another toast was being made. She could feel the distant vibration of applause through the walls, and neither of them moved toward it. They stayed like that for nearly an hour, talking in the unhurried way that only happened when two people had silently agreed to stop performing. He asked about her work with genuine curiosity and listened without interrupting. She asked about the estate with the detached interest of someone who appreciated architecture, but had no illusions about what money meant. The conversation moved, from work to cities to the particular loneliness of rooms full of people, with the ease of water finding its level. When she finally stood to leave, she smoothed her dress and found she didn't have a ready excuse for why it had taken this long. "Thank you," she said, and wasn't entirely sure what for. He looked up from the chair. In the dark, his eyes held something careful and entirely awake. "You know where the room is," he said quietly, "if you ever need the silence again."
Chapter 3.
Manhattan on a Monday morning had no interest in anyone's unresolved feelings. The city moved the way it always did, relentless, indifferent, magnificently loud, and Aurora let it carry her back into the rhythm she'd spent years perfecting: the commute, the coffee, the elevator that opened directly onto the 41st floor of the building where her name appeared on the glass panel beside the door. The clean, ordered world of numbers that asked nothing of her except clarity and precision, two things she had always been able to give without hesitation. She sat at her desk by 7:45 and had her first report open before 8. By 8:30 she had thought about Dominic Hale exactly 4 times and had categorized each instance with the clinical detachment of someone diagnosing a minor inconvenience. She was good at this. She had built her entire professional life on the ability to identify a variable, assess its relevance, and file it in the appropriate column. The problem was that nothing about Saturday night fit neatly into any column she owned. It wasn't that anything had happened. That was almost the more disorienting part. Nothing had happened by any measurable definition. A spilled glass, a quiet room, a conversation that had gone longer than either of them had planned. He hadn't asked for her number. She hadn't offered it. They had parted with the kind of clean finality that should have made the whole evening easy to close and shelve. And yet, she pulled up her browser at 9:15, told herself she was doing research, and typed his name. Dominic Hale. 41. Founder and CEO of Hale Capital Group, a private investment firm with assets under management that made Aurora's own considerable earnings look like a rounding error. Born in Boston, educated at Wharton, based in Manhattan for the past decade. 3 companies acquired in the last 2 years. A profile in a financial magazine from 8 months ago described him as, she scrolled down, precision-driven, privately guarded, and allergic to boardroom theater. She closed the browser. The thing that bothered her wasn't who he was. She operated in adjacent circles, attended the same caliber of events, understood the language of that world without being seduced by it. Dominic Hale's professional biography was impressive in the way that many biographies were impressive, assembled from the right decisions made at the right moments, impressive without being surprising. What bothered her was the piano room. The way he had sat in front of an instrument he hadn't touched in 3 years and looked at it like it still owed him something. The way he had listened, not with the performative attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with the quiet, complete focus of a man actually receiving what she said. The way the hour had passed without her noticing it, which was not something that happened to her. She picked up her phone and almost immediately put it back down. There was nothing to text. There was no thread, no number, no reason that wasn't simply, "I keep returning to something you said, and I don't know what to do with it," which was not a message she was prepared to send to anyone, let alone to a man she had spoken to for a collective 90 minutes at someone else's engagement party. She went back to her report. She finished it by noon. She ate lunch at her desk. That evening, Ada called, because Ada always called, and because the universe had a particular sense of timing. "You disappeared Saturday," her cousin said, without preamble, in the warm, accusatory tone she reserved exclusively for Aurora. "I was there until 11. "You were present until 11, there's a difference." A pause, then the smile Aurora could hear without seeing. "I noticed you talking to Dominic." Aurora kept her voice level. "We ran into each other in the corridor. He spilled champagne on my dress. And then nothing, Ada. Aurora." The way her cousin said her name carried an entire editorial. "He asked me about you the next morning." The information landed quietly, the way significant things often did. Not with noise, but with a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure, like the moment before weather changed. "What did he ask?" she said, before she could decide not to. "Your last name, what you do, whether you were seeing anyone." Ada's voice was carefully neutral, which meant she was enjoying every second of the conversation. "I told him you were brilliant, single, and constitutionally incapable of letting anything be easy. That last part wasn't necessary. It was accurate." Aurora was quiet for a moment, her gaze moving to the Manhattan skyline visible through her office window, all glass and steel, and the particular cold light of an autumn evening pressing in from the west. Somewhere out there, Dominic Hale was presumably in his own building, behind his own glass walls, and she had no idea what to do with the fact that he had asked about her. "He's a client in a lot of the same spaces I operate," she said finally. "It would complicate things." "You're already complicated," Ada said pleasantly. "At least be complicated with someone interesting." After they hung up, Aurora sat with her phone face down on the desk and her coffee going cold beside her laptop. She was not a woman who made impulsive decisions. She was not a woman who let a single conversation rearrange the furniture of her interior life. She had rules, not rigid ones but clear ones, and they had served her well. She looked at the skyline for a long time.
Chapter 4.
The email arrived on a Tuesday, at precisely 10:47 in the morning. Aurora noticed the timestamp later. She had a habit of cataloguing details that other people let slide, because it struck her as the kind of thing Dominic Hale would have considered before sending. Not too early, which would have suggested urgency. Not afternoon, which would have felt casual. Mid-morning. Professional, deliberate, calibrated to land in the window when a person was fully awake, but not yet defensive. The sender was his chief of operations. The subject line read, "Independent Audit Proposal, Hale Capital Group." She read it twice, then a third time, slowly, the way she read contracts that required her full attention. It was legitimate. That was the first thing she confirmed, because it was the first thing her professional instinct demanded. The scope was clearly outlined. A full financial audit of Hale Capital Group's 3 most recently acquired subsidiaries, with a 6-week timeline and a fee structure that was, if anything, slightly generous. The request for independence was genuine. They wanted someone outside their existing network, someone whose reputation was built on precision and impartiality. Her name had been recommended by 2 separate contacts whose judgment she respected. She sat with the email open on her screen for 11 minutes. Then she forwarded it to her assistant with 3 words: "Schedule the meeting." The Hale Capital Group occupied floors 38 through 42 of a glass tower on Park Avenue that caught the morning light and held it like a statement. Aurora arrived 7 minutes early, which for her meant on time, wearing a charcoal blazer over a fitted white shirt, her dark hair down, heels that were professional without being apologetic. She carried her laptop case and the specific expression she reserved for first meetings, attentive, composed, giving nothing away for free. The lobby was all polished concrete and architectural lighting, the kind of space designed to communicate power without appearing to try. She gave her name at reception, accepted a visitor's badge, and rode the elevator to the 40th floor while reviewing her notes on her phone with the focused calm of someone who was absolutely not thinking about the last time she had been in the same room as the man she was about to see. The elevator opened onto a reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Manhattan that was, objectively, extraordinary. She noticed it the way she noticed most beautiful things, completely, and without letting it interrupt her. Her assistant led her down a corridor of glass-walled offices, past rows of analysts staring at screens, toward a conference room at the far end. The door was open. 3 people were already seated around the table with laptops and folders arranged in the deliberate geometry of a prepared team. Dominic was standing at the window with his back to the room. He turned when she entered. The moment lasted approximately 2 seconds and contained considerably more information than 2 seconds had any right to hold. He was wearing a navy suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open exactly 1 button, not casual, but not armor either. His expression when he saw her was composed, measured, and underneath the composure there was something brief and entirely human that passed across his features before the professional register locked back into place. He crossed the room and extended his hand. "Miss Voss." His voice was the same, unhurried, low, the kind that carried without effort. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Hale." She shook his hand once, firm and clean. His grip was warm. She released it at the appropriate moment and turned toward the rest of the table. "I've reviewed the proposal. I have some preliminary questions before we discuss timeline." "Of course." He gestured toward the chair at the head of the table, not his seat, she noted, but the position that signaled she was being given the room. The choice was deliberate. Everything about him was deliberate. She sat. She opened her laptop. She asked her questions with the precise efficiency that had built her reputation, and the team responded well. They were prepared, organized, and clearly competent. She noted this the way she noted everything, filed and waited. Throughout it all, Dominic sat across the table and slightly to her left, contributing only when directly relevant, watching the exchange with the focused quiet of a man who had already decided something and was simply waiting for the meeting to confirm it. She was mid-sentence, citing a discrepancy in one of the acquisition timelines, when she glanced up and found his eyes already on her. He didn't look away. Neither did she, for precisely 1 second longer than professional neutrality required, before returning to her notes with the composed certainty of someone who had not just felt the air in the room shift 3 degrees. When the meeting ended 40 minutes later and the team began gathering their things, Dominic walked her to the elevator without being asked. They covered the length of the corridor in a silence that was not uncomfortable. At the elevator, he pressed the button and stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. "Your questions were excellent," he said, as expected. She looked straight ahead at the elevator doors. "I'll have a formal response on the proposal by Thursday." "I'll look forward to it." The elevator arrived. She stepped in and turned. He was watching her with the particular stillness she was beginning to recognize. Not passive, not waiting. Simply certain. The doors closed between them. She exhaled once quietly, in the privacy of the descending elevator. Thursday felt very far away.
Chapter 5.
6 days into the audit, Aurora had established a rhythm. She arrived at Hale Capital Group by 8:30. She worked through the morning in the conference room they had assigned her, a clean glass-walled space on the 39th floor with a long table, reliable Wi-Fi, and a view of Midtown that she had trained herself to stop noticing after the second day. She requested documents through the operations team, cross-referenced figures with the precision of someone who found genuine satisfaction in making numbers tell the truth, and left by 7 in the evening with her notes organized and her professional boundaries exactly where she had placed them. The system worked well. The problem was that Dominic kept disrupting it, quietly and without apparent effort. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment she could have pointed to and said, that's where the system failed. It was smaller than that, more cumulative. The way he appeared in the conference room doorway on the 3rd morning with 2 coffees, set one beside her laptop without comment, and left before she had formulated a response. The way he remembered on day 4, that she had mentioned preferring her reports printed double-sided, and the copies that arrived from his assistant were already formatted that way. The way he listened, that was the most disorienting part. She was accustomed to being heard in professional settings. Her work demanded it, her reputation enforced it. But Dominic listened the way very few people did, without preparing his next sentence while she was still finishing hers, without reducing what she said to its most convenient interpretation. On the fifth day, she had raised a concern about a valuation methodology in the second subsidiary's books, technically outside her immediate scope, and instead of deflecting, he had pulled his chair closer to her side of the table, studied the figures she was pointing to, and said, "You're right. I missed that. Walk me through your reasoning." 4 words that cost nothing, and meant more than she wanted them to. By the end of the first week, the professional distance she had constructed with such care had developed several small, precise cracks. The elevator incident happened on a Wednesday. It was 6:45 in the evening, and the floor had emptied to a skeleton crew of analysts who communicated exclusively in headphones and takeout containers. Aurora was packing her laptop when the power flickered, briefly citywide, the kind of micro-outage that Manhattan produced every few months without apology, and the building systems cycled through their reset with a low, almost imperceptible shudder. She discovered the consequences when she stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind her, and then nothing happened. 20 seconds of nothing. Then the intercom crackled, and a facilities voice informed her, with the cheerful detachment of someone not personally inconvenienced, that the elevator system was resetting and estimated restoration was 15 to 20 minutes. The doors opened again at the 39th floor. Dominic was standing there with his jacket over his arm and his phone in his hand, having apparently reached the same conclusion about leaving for the evening. He looked at the open elevator, then at her with an expression of mild and genuine amusement. "Facilities says 20 minutes, she said. "I heard." He stepped back from the doors. "There's a seating area at the end of the corridor." They sat in 2 chairs angled toward the window, the city spread below them in its evening configuration, lights multiplying as the sky darkened, the particular restless energy of Manhattan shifting from its daytime register into something warmer and less certain. His jacket was folded over the arm of his chair. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow in the way that happened when a person had been working rather than performing work. "How is the audit progressing?" he asked. "Honestly?" "Always." "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Your records are cleaner than most firms I've worked with. Whoever manages your compliance team deserves a significant raise." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I'll pass that along." They talked. About the audit first, then about the city visible through the glass, then about a building on the horizon that had gone up in the last 2 years, and that Aurora felt was an architectural overcorrection, and Dominic defended on structural grounds, with the quiet confidence of someone who had read the original brief. The conversation moved the way their conversations moved, without negotiating direction, finding its own current. The pizza arrived at 7:40, ordered by his assistant with the unquestioning efficiency of someone accustomed to her employer losing track of dinner. They ate at the small conference table near the window, the city doing what it always did outside the glass, and somewhere between the second slice and a conversation about the particular loneliness of being good at something that kept most people at arm's length, Aurora looked up and found him already watching her. His elbow was on the table. His expression was open in a way she hadn't seen in the conference room, less composed, more present. "You do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Say something true and then immediately check whether you said too much." The accuracy of it landed somewhere undefended. She felt the slight involuntary tension across her shoulders that meant he had seen something she hadn't offered deliberately. "Occupational habit," she said. "I know." A pause, careful and warm. "I'm not going anywhere." The elevator, when it finally resumed, felt like an interruption.
Chapter 6.
Santa Barbara arrived like a parenthesis in the middle of a sentence, a pause that changed the meaning of everything around it. Dominic had mentioned the trip on a Thursday, framed with the clean practicality of a business request, a coastal development project requiring on-site review 2 days, and the presence of someone who could assess the financial architecture of what was being built alongside the physical one. Aurora had accepted with the same professional composure she had been maintaining for 3 weeks, noted the dates in her calendar, and told herself the mild acceleration in her pulse was simply the effect of a compressed timeline. She almost believed it. They flew out on a Friday morning, a direct flight that Dominic spent reviewing briefs, and Aurora spent annotating documents on her laptop, with the focused discipline of someone who had decided, firmly and repeatedly, that this was a work trip. The car that met them at the airport was sleek and dark, the driver unhurried, and the coast appeared through the window gradually, first as a quality of light, then as salt in the air, then as the sudden overwhelming blue of the Pacific opening up to the left as they curved along the highway toward the project site. Aurora looked up from her laptop. She couldn't help it. "First time in Santa Barbara?" Dominic asked, without looking up from his own papers. "Second," she said. "I was 12. I don't think it counts." "It counts," he said. "You just have to overwrite the memory with something better." She returned to her documents. She read the same paragraph 3 times. The project site was a low-rise development set into a bluff above the ocean, clean lines, local stone, enormous windows designed to dissolve the boundary between interior and the water beyond. The architect met them on site and walked them through the plans with the evangelical enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for an audience worthy of the work. Aurora asked precise questions about projected costs and phasing. Dominic asked about load-bearing considerations and sightlines. The architect answered them both with equal energy, and at one point looked between them with the expression of someone who had assumed they were a couple and hadn't yet found reason to revise the assumption. Neither of them corrected it. She noticed that too. By late afternoon, the formal review was complete, and the remaining hours belonged to the kind of unstructured time that Aurora generally managed by filling it with work. But Dominic had suggested the beach, and it had not sounded like a request designed to impress her, which was precisely why she had agreed. The beach below the bluff was accessible by a narrow wooden staircase that required single-file descent. He went first and waited at the bottom with one hand extended to steady her on the last uneven step. A practical gesture, completely unremarkable, and yet the warmth of his hand around hers registered in a way that outlasted the 3 seconds of contact by a considerable margin. They walked without destination along the waterline, the Pacific enormous and indifferent beside them, the late light turning everything amber and unhurried. Her heels were in her hand. The sand was cool. The conversation had gone quiet in the comfortable way that only happened between people who no longer needed to fill silence to justify their proximity. It was Dominic who spoke first, and without preamble, and in a tone she had not heard from him before, quieter than his professional register, more unguarded than anything the conference room had produced. "You're the only person I feel real around," he said. The words arrived simply, without theatre, which made them considerably harder to deflect than something dramatic would have been. Aurora kept her gaze on the water for a long moment, feeling the weight of what he had just placed between them, not a declaration constructed to move her, but something that had clearly been true for longer than tonight, and had simply run out of room to stay unspoken. "Dominic," she said carefully. "I know," he said. "You don't have to answer it." But the answer was already everywhere, in the way she had stopped walking, in the way the space between them had narrowed without either of them accounting for the movement, in the way the amber light sat on his face and she was having genuine difficulty looking away from it. That evening, the hotel corridor was quiet at 11 o'clock. The kind of quiet that amplified small sounds, the distant suggestion of the ocean, the soft close of a door somewhere down the hall, the particular silence between 2 people standing closer than the situation required. They had walked back from dinner side by side, conversation unwinding slowly into the kind of comfortable quiet that felt more intimate than most conversations she'd had. At her door she had stopped and turned, and he had been closer than she expected. Not crowding, not calculated, simply there, with an expression that held everything he hadn't finished saying on the beach. He leaned toward her, almost imperceptibly. She stepped back. Not because she didn't want to. That was the part that made it difficult. The wanting was entirely present, entirely inconvenient, sitting directly behind her sternum with no interest in being reasoned with. "There's a line," she said quietly. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "A professional one. I can't—" "I know," he said. He straightened. No wounded expression, no pressure, no attempt to renegotiate what she had just said. Just a man accepting a boundary with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. But when she closed the door and stood with her back against it in the dark of the hotel room, the ocean audible through the window, she understood with complete and inconvenient clarity that the line she had drawn tonight was not protecting her professionalism. It was protecting something considerably more fragile than that.
Chapter 7.
Manhattan received her back without ceremony. That was the thing about the city. It had no interest in what had happened to you elsewhere. The same streets, the same noise, the same 41st floor, with its clean lines and organized surfaces, waiting with the patient indifference of a life that had continued without her for 2 days. Aurora returned to it on a Sunday evening with her suitcase and her laptop case, and the particular internal landscape of someone who had made a decision they were still in the process of convincing themselves was correct. She had drawn the line. She had held it. That was the right thing. She repeated this with some regularity over the following week, finding it most necessary at 7 in the morning, before the day had enough momentum to crowd out quieter thoughts, and again at night when the apartment was too still and the city outside the window offered light but no company. The audit work continued. She submitted her reports through the operations team, communicated via email with clean efficiency, and did not visit the 40th floor of the Park Avenue Tower. The distance was deliberate. It was also, she was slowly recognizing, considerably more difficult than she had anticipated. On Friday, Ada called. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that Ada opened the conversation with the particular brightness in her voice that Aurora had learned, over the course of a lifetime, to treat as an early warning system. They talked about the engagement, about a venue Ada was considering in the West Village, about a dress fitting that had apparently produced results worth narrating in detail, and then, with the seamless casualness of someone who had been building toward it the entire conversation, Ada said, "Oh, I had lunch with Dominic on Wednesday." Aurora kept her voice even. "How is he?" "Focused," Ada said. "Working too much." The usual, a pause, calibrated with the precision of someone who had learned timing from years of navigating important conversations. "He mentioned the audit was going well." "It is." "He also mentioned the Santa Barbara trip." Another pause, and then in the warm, unhurried tone of someone laying down a card they have been holding since the beginning of the game. "Aurora, he created that project for you." The sentence arrived with the specific quality of something that rearranged the room. "What?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "The coastal development." Ada's tone had lost its brightness now, not unkind, but direct, because Ada, for all her social brilliance, had never been able to watch Aurora misunderstand something important without intervening. "He's had the architectural plans for over a year. The financial review wasn't urgent. He accelerated the timeline and added the audit component specifically because it gave him a legitimate reason to bring you." Aurora stood up from her desk. She wasn't aware of deciding to. Her body simply required more space than a chair allowed. "He told you this," she said. "He didn't have to. I asked him directly, and he didn't deny it." A breath on the other end of the line. "He's not careless, Aurora, you know that. He doesn't do things without intention." After the call ended, she stood at her window for a long time, the city doing what it always did, indifferent, luminous, entirely unhelpful, while something shifted and reconfigured in her interior landscape with the slow, grinding inevitability of tectonic movement. She had thought the audit was legitimate. She had verified it, had checked the references, confirmed the recommendation chain, reviewed the scope with professional scrutiny, and found nothing that warranted suspicion. And it was legitimate, in the technical sense. The work was real. Her findings were real. But the architecture behind the invitation, the reason her name had risen to the top of the list, the reason the timeline had been compressed, the reason Santa Barbara had been included, that had been constructed around her without her knowledge or consent. The feeling that moved through her was not simple. It arrived in layers. The first was something warm and unwanted, a response to the sheer weight of what it meant that he had done this. Underneath that, arriving more slowly but with considerably more force, was something colder. The sense of a flaw that had been solid and was now revealed to have been designed by someone else. She had been a variable in his equation without being told she was in the room. She closed her laptop. She picked up her phone. She set it down. She picked it up again. By Monday morning, the colder feeling had settled into something clear and resolved, the way Aurora's most significant decisions always did. Quietly, without drama, with the particular finality of a woman who had thought something through to its conclusion and trusted what she found there. She arrived at the Park Avenue Tower at 9 a.m. She did not go through the operations team. She took the elevator directly to the 40th floor, walked past reception with the composure of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to stand, and appeared in the doorway of Dominic's office, where he sat at his desk, with his sleeves rolled up, and his attention on a document that he set aside the moment he saw her face. He knew immediately. She could see it. The way his expression shifted from surprise to recognition to something careful and prepared. "Aurora, I need to finish the contract," she said. Her voice was precise, unhurried, and entirely stripped of the warmth that had been accumulating between them for weeks. "The audit scope is complete. I'll submit the final report by end of week. We won't need additional meetings." He stood. "Let me explain." "I understood everything Ada told me," she said. "I don't need a different version." She held his gaze steadily, and what it cost her to do that, to stand in front of him and be this composed when what was breaking underneath the composure was considerable, was something she would not allow him to see. "You're brilliant at building structures, Dominic. That one had my name in the foundation without my permission." She left before he found the words that might have made her stay.
Chapter 8.
2 weeks of silence had a texture. Aurora discovered this the way she discovered most uncomfortable truths, gradually and then all at once, in the quiet moments when her professional armor was between applications, and there was nothing between her and the precise shape of what she was feeling. The silence had weight. It had temperature. It sat in the apartment on West 74th Street, with the patient permanence of furniture she hadn't chosen, but couldn't bring herself to move. She worked. That was the first and most reliable tool available to her, and she used it with the focused intensity of someone who understood that momentum was its own form of management. She took 2 new clients in the first week, a real estate firm requiring forensic accounting, and a tech startup whose books were creative in ways that were either inspired or illegal. She hadn't yet determined which. She filled her calendar with the deliberate thoroughness of someone landscaping over something they didn't want to look at directly. It worked in the functional sense. The days had structure and purpose and enough cognitive demand to keep the quieter thoughts from surfacing until evening, when the city outside her window went amber and the apartment went still and the numbers on her screen stopped being adequate company. She did not call Dominic. She did not expect him to call her. He didn't. This was, she told herself, the correct outcome. A man of his precision would understand a closed door when it was closed clearly. He would not push at boundaries she had drawn with explicit intention. She had known this about him from the elevator, from Santa Barbara, from every moment he had held himself back with the quiet discipline of someone who believed that respect was demonstrated rather than declared. She told herself this was a relief. She told herself this several times. Dominic, in the same 2 weeks, learned something he had not expected to learn at 41 years of age, that there was a specific variety of helplessness that no amount of resource or resolve could address. He had built companies from underfunded ideas. He had navigated acquisitions that required the simultaneous management of 12 competing interests. He had sat across tables from people who wanted things from him, and had always found somewhere in the architecture of the situation a lever he could reach. There was no lever here. He did not call her because she had asked him, without using those words, not to. He did not send an intermediary or an explanation through Ada, because both would have been a circumvention of the boundary she had drawn, and circumventing her boundaries was precisely what had created the problem. He went to work. He reviewed the final audit report when it arrived on Thursday. Thorough, precise, unimpeachable, exactly what her reputation had promised, and sat with it for a long time before forwarding it to his operations team without annotation. He ate dinner alone on Friday, and thought about pizza eaten at a conference table with the city going dark outside the glass, and the particular quality of her attention when she was arguing a point she knew she was right about, and the way she had looked on the beach in Santa Barbara, with her heels in her hand and the Pacific behind her, and he understood with the specific clarity that only absence produced that he had miscalculated in a way that mattered, not the wanting. That had been honest, and he didn't regret it. The construction, the architecture built around her without her knowledge, he had told himself it was harmless, the work was legitimate, the opportunity was real, and his intentions had been, what? Good. The road was famously paved with those. Aurora had not been wrong. He had placed her name in a foundation she hadn't agreed to stand in, and in doing so had made every subsequent moment between them The elevator, the pizza, the beach, the corridor outside her hotel room, something she now had reason to question retroactively. That was the part he couldn't engineer his way out of. On a Tuesday evening in the third week, he sat in his apartment on the Upper East Side. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of space that communicated exactly what it was designed to communicate, and did something he had not done in 3 years. He sat down at the piano. He didn't play. He simply rested his hands on the keys the way you rested your hands on something you had missed, not performing the reunion, just allowing it. The city hummed 40 floors below. The keys were cool under his palms. He stayed there for a long time thinking about permission, about the difference between building something for someone and building something with them, about the specific weight of a silence that belonged entirely to him. The envelope went out on a Wednesday. He had the architectural drawings professionally rendered, the office he had been quietly designing in the margins of other projects for weeks, the one with exposed brick and a northeast-facing window that caught the morning light the way her 41st floor never quite managed. A space built around how she actually worked, what she actually needed, with no audience and no agenda beyond the simple truth of it. The note took him 4 drafts. The final version was 8 words. "I built this thinking of you. Never a wall without your permission." He sealed it, gave it to the courier, and returned to the piano. This time, quietly, almost inaudibly, he began to play.
Chapter 9.
She read the note 11 times. Aurora was not a woman who did things 11 times. She was efficient by disposition and economical by habit, and repetition for its own sake had never held much appeal. But the 8 words on that card, handwritten, unhurried, in the precise and unperformed script of a man who had clearly written them with intention rather than speed, had a quality she couldn't resolve on the first reading or the third or the 7th, and so she kept returning to them the way you return to a sentence in a book that contained something you almost understood. "I built this thinking of you. Never a wall without your permission." The architectural drawings were extraordinary. She recognized that immediately and without bias, because beauty in precise things was something she had always been able to see clearly, regardless of its source. The office was everything her current space quietly wasn't. Northeastern light flooding through a window that faced the Manhattan rooftops she had loved since childhood, exposed brick with the warm texture of something that had existed before it was designed. A layout that understood how she actually moved through a workday, rather than how a generic professional was assumed to. There was a detail in the corner, a built-in shelf at exactly the height she would have specified had anyone asked, that made her close the drawings and set them face down on the kitchen table and stand at the window for a very long time. He had been paying attention, not performing attention. Actually receiving her, storing her, building something from what he found, and then offering it without condition, without expectation of response, as simply and completely as a person laying something down and stepping back. The warmth that moved through her at this recognition was immediate and genuine. The complexity that followed it was also genuine, and considerably less comfortable. She arrived at his building on a Thursday morning without an appointment. The receptionist recognized her from the audit weeks and made the call upstairs with the discreet efficiency of someone who understood that certain visitors did not require explanation. Aurora rode the elevator to the 40th floor and walked the familiar corridor with its glass-walled offices and morning light and the quiet industry of people doing serious work. His office door was open. He was at his desk, jacket on, reading something that he set down the moment she appeared in the doorway. He stood. She entered and closed the door behind her, and for a moment they simply occupied the same room, the first time in 3 weeks, and the accumulated weight of that absence settled around them like a change in pressure. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm not here to thank you for the drawings," she said. Not unkindly, but clearly. She set her bag on the chair beside the door and stood with her arms loose at her sides, which was how she stood when she intended to say the thing she had actually come to say rather than the safer version of it. "I need you to understand something first." He remained standing. He didn't reach for the composure she could see him choosing not to perform. He simply looked at her with the open, careful attention that had been disrupting her equilibrium since the first night in the Hamptons. "I'm listening," he said. "I've spent my entire career building a reputation on independence," she said. "Not just professionally, in every room I've ever walked into. The credibility I have is built on the understanding that I arrive without an agenda that belongs to someone else. When I take a client, it's because the work warrants it. When I make a recommendation, it carries weight because nothing behind it is compromised. She held his gaze steadily. What you did, regardless of intention, put a question mark beside 3 weeks of my work. It made me a participant in something I hadn't consented to, and beyond the professional dimension, it made me wonder what else had been constructed without my knowledge. Nothing, he said. Immediate quiet without defense in his voice, just fact. The audit scope was real. The recommendation chain was genuine. I accelerated the timeline and added components to make the invitation credible. But every finding you produced was earned independently. I didn't shape the work. I created the opening. I know the difference, she said. That's not the point. Then tell me the point. She exhaled slowly. The point is that I was afraid, not of the audit, not of the professional implication, afraid of what I felt in that room in the Hamptons, and in the elevator, and in Santa Barbara. Afraid that it was too much, too fast, too disruptive to everything I had decided my life should look like. She paused. And when I found out what you had done, it gave me a reason to close the door that had nothing to do with fear. It gave me something legitimate to stand behind. The room was very quiet. Dominic moved from behind his desk, not quickly, not with any performance of urgency, and stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the precise quality of his attention, the way he was receiving every word, without filtering it. I should have told you, he said. Not in the meeting, not mid-audit, before you walked through those doors. I should have called you and said, I want to work with you and I'm aware that's not a neutral desire, and I want you to have the full picture before you decide. He paused. That was the wall I raised without asking. I'm sorry. I know you are, she said. I meant every word of the note. I know that too. Her voice had lost its careful edge, the composure giving way to something more honest underneath it. That's what made it harder. The space between them had been narrowing in the way it always did, when they were in the same room long enough. Not rushed, not dramatic, just the quiet and inevitable physics of two people drawn past the range of comfortable distance. She could see the restraint in him, the deliberate patience of a man who had learned expensively not to move before she was ready. I don't want a door between us, she said quietly. But I need to walk through it myself. Something shifted in his expression, not relief exactly, something deeper and less performable than relief. Then walk through it, he said. I'll be on the other side. The distance between them was now measured in inches, in the warmth of shared air, in the almost unbearable patience of a moment that had been building since a spilled glass of champagne and an unmarked door and a piano no one was playing. Her hand found his first.
Chapter 10.
6 months had a way of changing the quality of light. Not literally. Manhattan in April produced the same assertive brightness it always had, indifferent to the personal calendars of the people moving beneath it. But Aurora noticed, on the morning of Ada's gallery opening, that the light coming through the northeastern window of her new office had a particular warmth she had stopped taking for granted. It fell across her desk at an angle that shifted with the hour, catching the edge of her coffee cup, illuminating the corner of whatever document she was reviewing, behaving exactly the way light behaved in a space designed around the person inhabiting it. She had moved in 6 weeks after the Thursday morning on the 40th floor, not because Dominic had asked her to, because she had looked at the drawings for the last time, measured them against everything she actually needed, and made the decision with the clean and unencumbered clarity of someone choosing something entirely for themselves. She had told him on a Sunday evening, over dinner at a small Italian place in the West Village, that had no interest in being impressive, and his response had been a quiet smile and the practical question of whether she preferred the built-in shelves in oak or walnut. She had chosen walnut. The office was everything the drawings had promised. She had added 3 things of her own: a print above the desk, a particular lamp she had owned since graduate school, and a small succulent on the windowsill that Dominic had given her without ceremony on the day she signed the lease, accompanied by the observation that it was, apparently, extremely difficult to kill. She had taken this as a gesture of confidence in her commitment rather than her horticultural ability. The succulent was thriving. Ada's gallery opening was at 7. in a converted warehouse space in Chelsea that had been transformed with the particular curatorial intelligence her cousin brought to everything she touched. Aurora dressed carefully, a deep emerald dress fitted and precise, with a neckline that required confidence and rewarded it, and was ready at 6:40 when she heard the knock at her apartment door. Dominic was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the same quiet precision she had catalogued on the first night, and he was holding two things, his car keys and a look that moved across her slowly and landed with the unhurried warmth of someone who had seen her in many configurations by now, and had not once been anything less than fully present for each of them. "You look extraordinary," he said. "You're on time," she said. "I've learned the value of punctuality." She picked up her coat and they took the elevator down together, and she was aware, she was increasingly aware of small things now, having spent years training herself out of the habit, of the ease of it. The unremarkable, profound ease of moving through an ordinary evening, with someone whose company felt like a natural extension of her own rhythm rather than an accommodation of it. The gallery was already alive when they arrived. Warm light, good wine, the particular energy of a room full of people who had come to see something beautiful, and were not disappointed. Ada's photographs covered the walls in long, considered sequences, black and white, intimate in scale, each one a portrait of a moment caught between happening and meaning. They moved through the room together, not announcing themselves, not requiring acknowledgement. He stayed close but not crowding, occasionally touching the small of her back as they navigated the crowd, a gesture so naturally integrated into the evening's movement that she had stopped registering it as significant and started registering it simply as his. Ada found them near the far wall, incandescent in a new red dress that she wore with the specific confidence of a woman who had worn red for years and had no intention of stopping. She looked at them, at the way they were standing, at the way Aurora's shoulder was angled toward Dominic without apparent awareness of it, at the glass in Aurora's hand and the hand of the man beside her resting with complete ease at the curve of her back. And her expression did something quiet and certain and deeply satisfied. "You're here," she said, and kissed Aurora's cheek and then Dominic's, and then looked between them with the smile of someone who had watched a very long story arrive at the page she had always expected it to reach. "You look beautiful," Aurora told her. "I know," Ada said pleasantly. "Go look at the photographs. Third sequence on the left. You'll recognize something." They found it a few minutes later, a photograph in the middle of the sequence taken at a party, black and white, the composition centered on a corridor rather than the celebration visible at its edges. Two figures, slightly blurred at the margins of the frame, caught in the specific geometry of people who had just found each other in a hallway and had not yet looked away. The caption read simply, "The Beginning." Aurora looked at it for a long moment. "She had this from the start," she said. "She had a lot of things from the start," Dominic said. There was warmth in his voice, but no surprise. "I think she was just waiting for us to catch up." They stayed until the last guests had drifted out, and Ada was deep in conversation with her photographer, and then they slipped onto the building's rooftop terrace, where the April air was cool and clear, and Manhattan spread in every direction with its relentless, luminous insistence on existing at full volume. The skyline held its own kind of beauty at this hour. Not subtle, not quiet, but honest in the way that only things lit from within could be. Aurora stood at the railing with her coat over her shoulders and the city below her and Dominic close beside her, and she was thinking about doors, about the wrong ones that had led to the right rooms, about the ones she had closed too quickly, and the ones she had finally chosen to walk through on her own terms, and about what it meant that the other side had looked exactly as he had promised. He leaned toward her and said something close to her ear. Something she would carry for a long time, something that belonged only to this moment, and the two of them, and the April air between buildings. She turned her face toward his. When they finally closed the distance, without hesitation, without interruption, with the complete and unhurried certainty of something that had always been moving toward this, it was exactly as that first night had promised, inevitable, devastating, and completely, irrevocably real. She had walked into the wrong room and found exactly where she was supposed to be. Aurora didn't fall in love recklessly. She arrived at it the way she arrived at every truth, carefully, completely, and on her own terms, because some stories don't begin with perfect timing. They begin with a spilled glass, a silent piano, and 2 people brave enough to keep the door open long enough to find out what was waiting on the other side. Was it the wrong room, or had it always been the right one? If this story moved something in you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It's the simplest way to say this was worth your time, and it means everything to us. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We read every single one.
How about it? Where did you hear that story? I'll see you next time. Bye.